Hello and welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
The call came on a gray Tuesday in late October, just as the first frost of the season settled across the pasture outside my kitchen window. The grass had turned brittle overnight, and a thin layer of ice clung to the bird bath beside the porch. My son, Daniel, was on the phone. His voice had that particular warmth he used whenever he wanted something. "Dad," he said, easy and casual, "Laura and I were thinking maybe we could spend Christmas at the farm this year. Bring the kids, do it the way we used to." I told him that sounded nice. I told him the house would be ready. But when I hung up, I stood there for a long time, looking out at the empty fields, feeling a quiet unease I couldn't explain. To understand why that feeling mattered, I have to go back a little. My name is Harold Bennett. I turned 67 last spring on a cool April morning, when the ice on Lake Simcoe finally began breaking apart, and the Canada geese came back in crooked lines across the sky. I've lived on this farm for 34 years. My wife, Margaret, and I bought it the same summer our son, Daniel, was born. The house itself had been standing since 1912. Thick limestone walls, creaking staircases, and windows that rattled whenever the winter winds came across the fields. The place was rough when we bought it. Margaret and I fixed most of it ourselves. We rebuilt the barn, planted the apple orchard along the southern slope, and fenced the pastures one post at a time. It took years, but eventually the land became something beautiful. Margaret used to say the farm felt alive. She died 7 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. She was 58, and she passed quietly in the upstairs bedroom in early November, 2 weeks before the first snow fell. After she was gone, I scaled things back. I kept the orchard going and rented some of the hay fields to a neighbor. People occasionally suggested I sell the property. I never considered it. The land had been Margaret's dream as much as mine. Selling it would have felt like burying her twice. My daughter Claire understood that. She lived in Toronto, taught history at York University, and came up whenever she could. Long weekends, holidays, sometimes just to sit with me on the porch in the evenings while the sun dropped behind the tree line. Daniel was different. He had always been the ambitious one. Spreadsheets, business plans, investments. He ran a renovation company in Kingston with his wife Laura. For a while, it seemed to be doing well. Laura worked in commercial real estate. She was polished and careful with her words. Whenever she shook your hand, you got the feeling she was quietly measuring your value. After Margaret died, Daniel started asking questions. At first they sounded reasonable. Had I updated my will? Did I have a long-term plan for the farm? Eventually the questions shifted. 200 acres, he pointed out one evening, could be worth a fortune if it was developed. I told him I wasn't interested. He smiled and said he understood. The summer before that October phone call, Daniel came up to visit alone. We walked the property together one morning. I remember noticing the way he looked across the fields. Not the way I looked at them, not the way Claire did. He looked the way Laura did, calculating. At one point he mentioned that a development group from Barrie had been quietly buying farmland nearby. "They're paying serious money," he said. I told him again I wasn't selling. He nodded. We went back inside and had lunch. At the time, I thought the conversation was finished. I was wrong. The Christmas visit was set for December 22nd. Daniel and Laura would drive up with the kids, Evan, 10 years old, and Mia, who had just turned 7. Claire planned to arrive a day earlier. I looked forward to it in the cautious way people learn when they live alone. Company brings warmth, but when it leaves, the silence becomes heavier. A week before they arrived, something strange happened. I was in the barn checking the old tractor when I noticed a section of the loft floor had been disturbed. The boards above the stone foundation had been loosened. Not smashed, carefully lifted and placed back. The nails were still there, but they weren't holding properly. If someone stepped there without knowing, the boards would collapse. The drop to the stone floor below was nearly 12 feet. I stood there for a long moment staring at it. Then, I fixed the boards and told myself an animal must have gotten in somehow. But that night, I slept badly. 2 days later, something else happened. I had been taking blood pressure medication for years. When my bottle ran low, I opened a new one from the cabinet in the mudroom. The pills looked slightly different. Not dramatically, just a shade darker. I assumed the pharmacy had switched manufacturers. 2 mornings later, I woke up so dizzy I had to sit on the edge of the bed until the room stopped spinning. A heavy nausea settled in my stomach. I hadn't felt that way in years. I did not take another pill from that bottle. Instead, I called my pharmacist, Arthur Cole, in town. When I described what I saw, he asked me to bring the bottle in. I said I would, but instead of taking it to him, I hid it on a high shelf in my study behind a row of books. Something about the situation felt wrong, very wrong. For nearly 2 days, I sat at my kitchen table, staring out at the frost-covered fields. A cold realization had begun forming in my mind. My son was 39. He had stood beside me at his mother's funeral and cried. He brought my grandchildren to visit. He called often enough. And yet, I found myself asking a terrible question. When had I stopped being his father and started becoming his problem? I called Claire that Thursday evening. I didn't explain everything. I simply told her something had unsettled me and asked if she could come earlier than planned. She didn't hesitate. "I'll be there Sunday," she said. Claire arrived Sunday afternoon and took one look at my face before setting down her bag. "Okay," she said gently. "Tell me." So I did. Everything. The barn floor. The pills. Daniel's sudden enthusiasm about Christmas. Claire didn't dismiss a single word. She asked careful questions. Then she said she wanted to see the barn. We walked out together as light snow drifted across the yard. She studied the repaired boards for several minutes. When she stood up again, her expression had changed. "All right," she said quietly. "Here's what we're going to do." Over the next 2 days, Claire contacted an old university friend who now worked with the Ontario Provincial Police. Detective Sarah Patel drove up Monday evening. She listened carefully. She took the pill bottle. She inspected the barn. Before leaving, she told me one thing: continue Christmas exactly as planned. Daniel and Laura arrived the afternoon of December 22nd. The kids exploded out of the car in winter coats and ran toward the barn looking for the cats. Evan had grown taller since the summer. Mia hugged me and immediately began telling me about the chapter books she could now read. Daniel hugged me at the door. "Good to be back," he said. Dinner that night felt normal, almost too normal. Claire had made Margaret Shepherd's pie recipe. Laura opened a bottle of wine. The kids were loud and cheerful. Daniel told a long story about a renovation project his company had completed. I listened, smiled, and nodded. Later that night, we sat by the wood stove together. After a long silence, Daniel spoke. "Have you thought any more about what you'll eventually do with the property?" His voice was casual, careful. He mentioned an investment group interested in agricultural land. "They're offering serious money," he said. "Enough for you to retire somewhere comfortable." I looked at him for a moment. "How old do you think I am?" I asked. He laughed. "That's not what I meant. I'm just thinking about your future." I nodded. Then I went to bed. Christmas morning, the children woke before dawn. Wrapping paper covered the living room floor. Daniel came downstairs around 7, wearing a red sweater. He stopped the moment he saw Detective Patel sitting at the kitchen table with 2 officers. The color drained from his face. He looked at me. I didn't say anything. Patel introduced herself calmly and asked him to sit down. Claire quietly took the children into the back of the house. I stepped outside onto the porch. Snow covered the orchard in a smooth white sheet. Behind me, voices rose inside the kitchen. Daniel's voice grew loud, then quiet. Later, Patel explained everything. Daniel had forged a power of attorney document that would give him control of my finances if I became medically incapacitated. He had debts, serious ones, the medication, the barn floor. The plan had been unfolding for months. Claire stayed with me after they left. That evening I walked alone through the orchard. The trees stood bare against the winter sky, their branches thin and patient. For 30 years I had watched them endure storms, frost, drought. Every spring they returned. Standing there in the quiet, I realized something difficult but true. Land can survive generations, but families sometimes break much more easily.